What happens when a cowboy helped a starving native child? The next day, 200 warriors lined up outside his barn. Witness this unbelievable true inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. The year was 1876, deep in the Montana Territory. The frontier was a harsh, unforgiving place where survival meant everything, and trust was a luxury few could afford. Thomas McAllister, a weathered cowboy in his early 40s, had carved out a modest life on a small ranch at the edge of the wilderness. He wasn't rich, but he had his cattle, his land, and his dignity. That was enough. It was late autumn, and winter's icy breath was already creeping across the plains. Thomas had spent the entire day mending fences on the northern edge of his property when something caught his eye near the creek bed. At first, he thought it might be a wounded animal, but as he rode closer, his heart sank. It was a child, a young native boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, collapsed against a fallen log. The boy's clothes were torn and threadbare, offering little protection against the biting cold. His lips were cracked and blue, his small frame trembling violently. Thomas didn't hesitate. He dismounted quickly, wrapped the child in his own coat, and lifted him onto his horse. The boy was barely conscious, his eyes fluttering open just long enough to register fear before closing again. Thomas knew the risks. Tensions between settlers and native tribes were at an all-time high. There had been conflicts, broken treaties, and blood spilled on both sides. Taking in a native child could mark him as a sympathizer, or worse, put him in the crosshairs of both his own community and the tribe's. But as he looked down at that fragile, starving child, none of that mattered. This wasn't about politics or territory. This was about a human life hanging in the balance. Back at the ranch, Thomas worked through the night. He built up the fire, wrapped the boy in warm blankets, and carefully spooned broth into his mouth. The child was severely malnourished and dehydrated, likely separated from his tribe for days, maybe weeks. Thomas didn't know his name or his story, but he knew one thing: this boy deserved a chance to live. As dawn broke the next morning, Thomas had finally gotten the boy stabilized. The child was sleeping peacefully by the fire, his breathing steady for the first time since Thomas had found him. Exhausted but relieved, Thomas stepped outside to tend to his morning chores. That's when he froze. Standing in a perfect line stretching across the horizon, just beyond his barn, were warriors. Not a dozen, not 50, 200 native warriors, mounted on horses, each one armed and silent as stone. The morning mist swirled around them, making the scene even more surreal. Thomas felt his blood run cold. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle near his door, but he stopped himself. If they wanted him dead, he'd already be dead. Slowly, deliberately, Thomas stepped forward, his hands visible and empty. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept walking. From the center of the formation, an older warrior rode forward. His face was weathered and wise, adorned with the markings of a chief. Behind him rode several other warriors, their expressions unreadable. The chief dismounted with practiced grace and walked toward Thomas. For a moment that felt like an eternity, they simply looked at each other. Then the chief spoke in broken English, his voice deep and measured. "You found my grandson." Thomas swallowed hard and nodded. "He's inside. He was starving, nearly frozen. I did what I could." The chief's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He gestured to one of the warriors behind him, who dismounted and entered the barn under Thomas's watchful gaze. Minutes passed like hours. Then the warrior emerged, carrying the young boy, now awake and wrapped in Thomas's best blanket. When the child saw his grandfather, his face lit up with joy and relief. He spoke rapidly in his native tongue, gesturing toward Thomas. The chief listened intently, his gaze never leaving the cowboy's face. Finally, the chief turned back to Thomas and spoke again. "My grandson says you saved his life. He says you showed him kindness when you had every reason to turn away. He says you are a good man." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone should do." The chief shook his head slowly. "No, not anyone. Many would have looked away. Many have looked away. What happened next would become the stuff of legend in that territory." The chief raised his hand, and the entire line of warriors dismounted in perfect unison. They began unloading supplies: dried meat, furs, woven blankets, tools, and even horses. They stacked these offerings near Thomas's barn, creating a mountain of goods that represented more wealth than Thomas had seen in years. But that wasn't all. The chief explained that Thomas had saved not just any child, but the grandson of their tribe's most respected leader. The boy had wandered off during a hunting expedition and gotten lost in a sudden storm. They had been searching for him for 3 days, fearing the worst. "From this day forward," the chief declared, "you are under the protection of our people. Any who harm you will answer to us. Your kindness will not be forgotten." Thomas stood there, overwhelmed and speechless. What began as a simple act of human decency had forged an alliance that would protect him and change the dynamics of that entire region. Word spread quickly about the cowboy who saved the chief's grandson, and Thomas became a bridge between two worlds that had known mostly conflict. This incredible story reminds us that compassion knows no boundaries. One man's decision to help a dying child, regardless of the risks, created ripples that extended far beyond that cold autumn night. It proved that humanity, kindness, and courage can overcome even the deepest divisions. What would you have done in Thomas's position? Let us know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe to Whisper of the Past for more incredible historical tales, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Until next time, keep exploring the whispers of history.